Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company, a nationally ranked community-focused bank with over 30 locations throughout Virginia, Northeast Tennessee, and North Carolina. Who you choose to bank with can make all the difference. Visit firstbank.com to learn more. What's going on, Hokie Nation? A new week, a new opponent, and a new challenge, this time again on the road for Virginia Tech. The Hokies head out west, a meeting with Stanford at 3:30 p.m. We got the football crew on set, Will Stewart on set as well. We're unpacking it all. It's episode 380, the Tech Sideline podcast, and it starts right now. And we're coming at you, recording our preview pod on a Wednesday, October 2nd, 2024, from our high-tech studio in the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center. Remember to like, subscribe, refer the show to a friend, and head over to techsideline.com to check out our extensive editorial content. Subscriptions, they're just $12 a month for loads of content, and for Virginia Tech students, your subscription is free. Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company, and this podcast is also brought to you by the Hokie Way. The Hokie Way thanks Virginia Tech fans for their support of our mission to leverage student-athletes' name, image, and likeness in support of charitable organizations. To learn more about us and the organizations that we support, visit thehokieway.org. I'm your host, Giovanni Heater. To my right, Chris Coleman, our lead analyst and columnist. Across the way is Andy Bitter, our senior staff writer. In the fourth chair, founder and general manager Will Stewart. And the mustache man, Nick Brown, producing the show behind the scenes. We're going to start our preview pod, as we always do, talking about the press conference that happened yesterday. Brent Pry speaking with the media, as he always does on a Tuesday. Andy and David were both there. First and foremost, Andy, once again, the call was brought up by Brent Pry. Of course, that infamous moment down in Miami Gardens against the Hurricanes. What did Coach Pry have to say? And he made it pretty clear this is going to be the last time they talk about it.
Well, yeah, he said that, but then we asked him some questions about it anyway, because you don't just get to decide that's the last you're talking about it. We're going to ask you about that at a press conference. He came out and said that they eventually got in contact with the ACC and they explained the decision, and he basically said he still doesn't agree with it. I think when the when the ACC official called him, he said that they used words like, oh man, where was it? Interpretation and hard to find when he was explaining the thing, and Pry is like, well, that's not indisputable. So I think that's still where the root of this issue that Tech has with the catch. And I even asked Pry at the end, I'm like, do you think it was a catch? Do you think he caught the ball? And he didn't answer it directly. I think he was confused when I asked the question initially, but he's like, they ruled it a catch. And there's two officials right there in the field that were making that ruling and saw the play closer than anybody else in the field. So sort of a dodge of the question. It's not like, yeah, he caught the ball, because I don't think anybody looks at that play and goes, sure, he caught the ball, because 2 seconds later the ball's on the ground and Miami's running around celebrating. So it's not this clear cut catch thing that I think that Virginia Tech is arguing. I think they're saying, hey, the replay standard is indisputable, and this didn't meet that. And that's where they really have the problem with it. And Pry said, he'll bring this up in the offseason, that they have to have a more transparent replay process. You shouldn't have to wait. I mean, this was Monday when he got word about this thing. You shouldn't have to wait 3 days to find out about this, or find out the ACC's reasoning on the play through the media. And that's how he found out. It was 1:14 in the morning. Andrea Adelson of ESPN got a statement from the conference about how the play was ruled. So, I think the process of replay is really where the issue is that the Hokies have with this play, and they're going to have to agree to disagree with this, because it's not going to change.
Right. There was nothing to overturn that it wasn't a touchdown, and Pry even said there was nothing to overturn it to a touchdown if they originally had called it incomplete. So regardless, there was just no true conclusive evidence, and Coach stands by that. How about the double numbers, Andy? You continue to bring that up as well.
I did. We didn't have a chance to ask that after the game. People were like, nobody asked the questions that need to be asked. I was like, well, okay, we kind of pressed for time. There were larger issues after the most controversial finish to a game that I've had here in 14 years. So that's kind of what the focus was after the play. or after the game, I asked him about the double numbers issue, and he's like, I'm glad you asked that. And he went into this big long answer. I can't imagine he was glad I asked that question, highlighted another gaffe that they had on special teams. But, he gave this explanation. He's like, well, coming out of the timeout, they didn't have somebody in that spot. They had 10 guys on the field, and like, he couldn't have kicked it because it would have gotten blocked. And he just turned around and found the most reliable big body guy that he could, and he threw him in the game. And it was Cole Nelson, who was number 17, who went into the game, and the kicker is number 17. So that's a problem. And at a certain point, they even noticed it on the sideline. You watch the replay, the TV replay, and I don't know the staffer's name. He looks like Trevor Lawrence with long hair, wearing a purple shirt behind Pride. You can see him on the TV thing. He's like, there are 2 number 17s on the play, and it's like, at that point, you can't do anything. I thought you could still maybe sub him out, but I guess once you break the huddle like that, it would have been a delay game or a legal sub penalty if you try to bring somebody else into the play. So that you're really sort of just hoping that you can get by without the officials noticing, and they didn't notice it. So he explained that they were in a rush and they had to just run somebody on the field. Didn't quite work that way. I mean, when they were lining up to kick it, the play clock had still not even started. So maybe sort of a cooler head or a calmer reaction there, they could have gotten the right person onto the field. But I mean, it's a fiasco again. I mean, they were lucky to avoid it on this one, but I mean, their explanation of we just had to find somebody and throw them out there. I mean, if you're Cole Nelson, you have to know that you can't be on the field when the kicker is on the field. And I guess there was some talk about whether Kyle Lowe was going to kick the long field goal, and John Love ended up doing it. But if I'm Cole Nelson, whenever the field goal block unit's on there, I'm like, listen, I can't go in the game. I'm number 17, and that's like the main number on the field right now. That's a number everybody's going to see is the kicker, number 17. I can't be out there too. And it's amazing that this popped up again, and this is an issue.
And both times it was the doubling of the most important person on the field, the punt returner and Ollie Jennings, with Jalen Lane not being able to return punts against Vanderbilt in the opener, and then your kicker in John Love. Last thing on the press conference, Andy, coach seemed very adamant in aggressively turning the page, I believe was his exact phrasing, telling the families of the players, we're looking at Stanford, and we ask your assistance to help us in doing so.
Yeah, he said that they're turning the page in an aggressive manner, which, I said was like Metallica covering a Bob Seger song there. You can say you're turning the page, and that's what they're doing. They're focusing on the players they gave us this week. Was certainly aimed at turning the page. I mean, we requested DeQuan Felton, Caden Moore, Dorian Strong, I believe. I think all those guys might have strong opinions about that play. Certainly Caden Moore would have an opinion about that blocking call that he got flagged for that wiped out the penalty. DeQuan Felton, obviously central to that last play. And they gave us, it was a linebacker, Caleb Woodson, who's young. He's not too experienced at talking in press conferences like that. So I think he'll get there and open up a little bit more in those instances. They gave us a backup offensive lineman in Brody Meadows, and today they gave us the punter. So you can tell exactly we're 1 for 8 on requests in the last 2 weeks with Virginia Tech. So they're very clearly trying to control, who is talking and who is saying stuff in these things. But they're going to try to turn, it's in the past. You got to move past it, because if you don't, and you're sitting there, still complaining about last week's game, how focused can you be on the game ahead?
Sure.
And if you have to travel cross country like this, and I know Stanford has struggled, but they've also looked good at times this year. You're going to go out there, you're going to get beat if you're not focused on the team ahead of you.
Will, it seemed like you wanted to chime in over there.
Yeah, Andy, I wanted to ask you about something. One of the things that stood out to me that Price said was that he communicated to the players' parents not to continue to dwell on the Stanford game. He said, if your sons try to talk to you about it, just say, that's okay. You guys need to move on. That implies to me that Pry has a regular line of communication to all the parents. Is that how you interpreted that? And oh, by the way, it kind of that I think that's a good characteristic of a well-run program. If you communicate often and clearly with the parents. I'm not sure that was true of past coaches, is kind of what I'm getting at. What is your take on that?
I guess. I mean, I didn't think about the logistics of how you would communicate with all the way. There's like a group text that just sends out. I can imagine that's the best. Do not respond to this group text, or do not reply to this email. I think it makes sense to try to do it, because obviously these people are in contact. These kids are in contact with their parents and stuff like that. And I would imagine the parents are like, oh, you guys, they screwed you over in that game and all that stuff. I can imagine how that could linger in a player's head. But again, it's probably a smart idea if you're trying to get the entire program to move forward. Get everybody on the same page doing it. They're like, wives and girlfriends of players. They're trying to get everybody to move forward in this. Even mentioned the media, which I mentioned before, which we're obviously not going to move forward from that yet because we're talking about it right now because that's our job is to review this stuff. But they're going to try to control the interaction with the media so it doesn't become a focus on that.
And then they're going to go to class all week and hear it from other students all week.
Well, I mean, that's what you're fighting against because they're going to come back and that's going to be if DeQuan Felton goes into a class this week, the people will be like, man, you caught that ball. I'm sure that's the first thing that people say to him. And I don't know if DeQuan Felton could respond, yes, I definitely caught that ball, but they did rule it a touchdown initially, and it's kind of hard to overrule it.
All right, well, we're going to try and follow suit with the team, and we're going to flip the script here and take a look at Stanford. 3:30 kickoff on the ACC network, and it's a 12:30 local time all the way out west. Everyone thinks it's in Palo Alto. It's actually kind of like Notre Dame. It's in Stanford California.
Itself, yeah.
So it's not technically in Palo Alto when you look at the legal address. Virginia Tech opened up somewhere around 6.5-point favorites. This line has swung. We're going to get into the reasons as to why. Virginia Tech favored by as many as 8.5 to 9.5, depending on the platform that you're looking at. But always feel good when you're favored by over a touchdown heading on the road in a conference game. Stanford is led by second-year head coach Troy Taylor. He's very hands-on with this offense, Chris.
He's also their offensive coordinator, calls plays, their quarterbacks coach. He had been an offensive coordinator at Utah. He was the head coach at Sacramento State, where he did an excellent job. So, yeah, this is very much a Troy Taylor offense. And, they've struggled to get off the ground. They went 3-9 last year with, it's funny, they had a home loss to Sacramento State. So you're sitting there thinking, oh, what a bad job he did in that game. But at the same time, he lost to the program that he built, right? So
the FCS program that he built.
Exactly. So great job, but also bad job, right? So I don't know what to think about that. But they're better this year. But they still, that program just bottomed out under Shaw the last few years he was there, and they're rebuilding from the ground up from a talent standpoint. They're better this year. They've got some good players at certain spots. Like, they're going to have the best wide receiver on the field, but Virginia Tech has more good receivers. You know what I mean? I think their defense is stout up front, but they don't have much in the secondary. So there's some talent on the team, but it's not widespread talent. There are some positions that I like, some positions that I don't like. They may or may not have their starting quarterback. I'm guessing no, and I don't think he's very good to begin with. So they're going to a backup, and so this is a game like that Virginia Tech probably should win. I mean, a backup quarterback on the road against a team that went 3-9 last year, probably need to win that game.
Do you know the last time Stanford won more than 4 games in a season?
2016.
2018. But it's been a while.
Yeah.
I mean, it's which is weird because that was just a program that was chugging along for a while. I mean, you don't have to tell Tech fans about how good Stanford was back in that Orange Bowl with tight ends running down the field over and over in that game against Andrew Luck. I mean, this is a program that was for a solid decade there, one of the Pac-12's best, and certainly has fallen on hard times here with a rebuild. But, I do think Taylor's a pretty good coach, and I think you give him enough time, he'll get there. But this is still a process right now.
The Cardinal currently sits at 2-2 on the season, 1-1 in ACC play. Opened the season with a tough loss against TCU at home. Final score of that one was 34-27. Blowout win against Cal Poly. On the road at Syracuse, probably their best win of the season to this point. A couple of Friday nights back, beat Syracuse in the Dome, 26-24. The final score, won it on a game-winning field goal, and then they're coming off the heels of a 40-14 loss on the road in Death Valley against the 17th ranked Clemson Tigers. So 1-1 in conference play. I think that win against Syracuse might end up looking good. Yeah, you were in there a little bit against Clemson. The score was never really all that close, but when you look at total offense, they sort of held their own.
They did. And, at one point, I think it was early in the fourth quarter in that game, they had the ball deep in Clemson territory, and it was 20-7 Clemson. And I'm sitting there keeping up with the game on my phone, and I'm like, wow, Stanford's about to score, and this is going to be a 6-point game in the fourth quarter. And then I stopped paying attention, and I look back, and like an hour later, and Clemson's won by 4 touchdowns. What in the world happened there? It was a bunch of turnovers. Not only was
I tuned in early, and it felt like I saw a pick in the end zone, and then like another pick at the 5-yard line or something. So they were down there. They had chances.
Exactly. They threw 3 picks. They were also stopped on 4th down 3 times, which is a different kind of turnover. So basically 6 turnovers in that game for Stanford. But physically, they did hold their own with Clemson.
Taking a look at this Stanford offense, they're pretty decent at running the football. They're number 46 in the country, also 46th in yards per carry, but where they really drop off is in Ashton Daniels, starting quarterback in this passing game. He can run the ball with his legs. He struggles to throw it. They're 112th in total passing offense so far this year, and it just kind of continues to tail off from there.
Yeah, he's got more interceptions and touchdowns this year. He threw 3 in Death Valley last week before he got hurt. So who knows? Maybe he had another one in him if he hadn't gotten hurt. I think they're going to have to lead on the running game against Virginia Tech. You know, their starting running back is technically Cedric Irving, but I think he's only 3rd on the team in carries. They've got a true freshman running back, Michael Ford, who had over 100 yards against Clemson, and he hadn't done quite as much their first couple weeks, but he's come on the last 2 games or so, and 36 carries for 183 yards on the season. Seems like he's probably going to be their primary ball carrier from here on out, and he is their most talented runner. He wasn't a highly recruited guy. He's from New Jersey, only a 3-star recruit, not in the top 25 in the state of New Jersey, but looks like he's probably Stanford's best running back right now.
Well, I think it's so critical whether or not Daniels plays in this game. I mean, he's their leading rusher, 250 yards, 50 carries too. That's 14 more than anybody else on the team. I guess he suffered an ankle or foot injury late in the game.
There are rumors on the Stanford boards that he's got a broken foot, and I don't know if that's true or not, but I'm not expecting him to play this week.
And that might be, you see the line move up like it did. Early line was like 3.5, and now it's up around 8.5, 9.5. So I wonder if people factoring in that when doing that. But I don't know what they have behind him necessarily in terms of experience. So they have a pretty top flight signee that they brought in.
They did. Elijah Brown. He hasn't played yet. They were planning on redshirting him.
Oh, wait, he's 7 of 7 this year. Hold on.
Oh, is he?
Yeah, I guess he got in for a little bit.
Yeah, probably in the Cal Poly game.
You can still redshirt and play 4 games,
you can,
right?
Yeah. Justin Lamson was the guy they brought in last week. He's a junior. For his career, he's only completing like 43% of his passes. But he played a lot for Stanford last year. I think he had 112 carries. So he's a guy they trust to run the football. Apparently he's a good running quarterback. So there's that to think about as a Virginia Tech fan. That seems like you can't really escape that. But if the Hokies face a backup quarterback this week, that'll be the 2nd time in the last 4 games.
Transfer from Syracuse, never played a snap in upstate New York, like Chris had mentioned, played a handful last year for Stanford. Daniels, in all likelihood, so it seems like on the set we've kind of come to the conclusion that he doesn't go. Where can Virginia Tech find success defensively against Justin Lamson? Because even though he's a junior, he's pretty inexperienced.
Fairly inexperienced and just hasn't been a good passer in his career. Old school Virginia Tech defenses would eat one-dimensional offenses for lunch. And I think what you've got to do is sell out on the run, man up on the outside, even though they have a great wide receiver that we'll talk about later. He's their only good wide receiver. He's their only wide receiver that averages double-digit yards per catch. They're just not a threat out there. So I think you load up on that running game and stop it. Now, you've got to be disciplined because they'll run RPOs and read options and things like that, and it's that type of offense that has given Virginia Tech run defense trouble. But this is a game where you have a backup quarterback most likely, or even if Daniels does play. I mean, he threw for like 70 yards against Clemson and 3 interceptions. And for the season, he's got more interceptions and touchdowns. And he didn't have a good year last year. Like, they don't have a good quarterback, flat out. I don't care if it's their starter or their backup. This is a game Virginia Tech's defense shouldn't struggle all that much with.
That's the weekly kiss of death from Chris Coleman.
I know. I'm saying what should happen, not what will happen.
Watch, they'll start Elijah Brown, and that'll be like the start of his All-American career or something like that. It's interesting if like this is a long-term thing with Daniels. Like, yeah, you would prefer to redshirt the freshman like that if he's not going to be playing. But, man, all of a sudden, if it's a toss-up about whether he plays, maybe he just goes in there and they actually go with the guy.
Well, let's talk about this stud of a wide receiver that they have on the outside. This is a guy that scouts are calling a Sunday player, like a guy that's going to play in the NFL, could be drafted in the first couple of rounds when things are all said and done. And his name's Alec Iomanner. He's an absolute freak, and he really came to the nation's eye because when you play out west, you're playing late at night. Sometimes you slip through the cracks. Not last year in a Friday night game against Colorado. We know what Deion Sanders in prime time has brought to that program, and pretty much
Not a lot of defense. That's what they brought.
Fair. but whoever they're playing usually gets the spotlight for a week as well. And Alec Iomanner took advantage of that opportunity. He had 13 catches for 294 yards and 3 touchdowns against Colorado on a Friday night last year. It was all the talk on game day the next morning. Everybody remembers that. And he's kind of just continued to play up to that level. Now, he's not had this 294 receiving yards type of game, but the one game I watched when they beat Syracuse in the Dome, he was lights out. He had a one-handed catch in the end zone for a touchdown that was just next level, like Odell Beckham Jr. type catch. And then they go to him at the end of the game, needed to convert on a 4th and 9. If they don't get the first down, Syracuse wins the game. They got the ball at midfield out of field goal range. What do? They go to Alec Iomanner. You cannot catch a ball better. You can't place it better. So to Ashton Daniels' credit, I mean, he had a great game against Colorado last year, and then he makes that play happen. When they click, and Iomanner's just a next level ball player.
He is. He was another guy who wasn't really highly recruited out of high school, but
Canadian.
Yes, that's right.
He's from Medicine Hat, Alberta, Canada.
I know about.
I just
where
like that
Alberta
fact.
is.
I don't,
How about that? So out near Calgary somewhere. So yeah. You see a lot of most of your Canadian football players come from like Quebec region or something like that, the eastern part, the more populated part of Canada, not necessarily.
It says here his family has roots in Saskatchewan. So that's out there.
Interesting, yeah. At any rate, yeah, over 60 catches last year for over 1,000 yards as a redshirt freshman, obviously highlighted by that one game. Another 21 for 284 so far this year. And again, I think if he had a little bit better quarterback play around him, those numbers would be even better. But he's a big-time player. Now, their issue is their number 2 receiver is only averaging 8.5 yards per reception. And all the other receivers, wide receivers, are under 10 yards a catch also. And I don't know if that's a function of like Daniels just not being a very good quarterback or that group is somewhat limited. Probably a little bit of both. But overall, there's only one positive to their passing game, and it's him.
Gio, what is the Iomanner experience watching that as a fan of the other team going up against that? How many profanities were uttered watching that game?
Well, it's a little frustrating when you have the throw overthrown, that one-handed catch, clear overthrow, and he's the only guy that can go up and get it. Maybe in the conference, right, at that level, like to go up and get that was an unbelievable catch. And then the 4th and 9, unfortunately it was more of a misplay by Syracuse. They gave him single coverage.
Yeah, you might want to double cover him on the most important play of the game.
Everyone in the stadium,
the defense there,
knew where it was going, except apparently Syracuse's defense.
Right.
They give him single coverage, and he's got the size mismatch.
Remember the announcers saying the same thing.
Yeah.
That they were shocked that it was that easy for him.
But he's a fun ball player. And then that game against Colorado last year, remember they trailed by, I think Colorado had like a 24-point halftime lead or something crazy, and Iomanner helped them come all the way back and win that game.
Well, I mean, it'd be interesting to see how Tech defends him. Because I know they have 2 pretty good corners, but Dorian is their better cover guy, I think. And we'll talk to Derek Jones today. We're recording this on a Wednesday. We'll talk to him tonight. We'll see how they... if they reveal anything of how they plan to do it. Like, are they going to have Dorian follow him around on the field? Or are they going to play left and right like they typically do? It will kind of be interesting to see how they approach that. And they might not just tell us straight up how they're going to do it on a Wednesday. That's typically not how Brent probably likes to do his game planning, is to inform the media of how he's going to do this. But I think it's an interesting debate when you have a clearly top receiver like that. And, Dorian is clearly their top cover guy over the last couple of years.
You know how sometimes you play a basketball team and they've got one really elite scorer and everybody else is just kind of meh. And there's 2 schools of thought. Do you shut down the really good scorer, or do you let him get his and make sure nobody else does anything else? So that's kind of the situation with Virginia Tech here. If you double cover him, if you shade a safety or a linebacker, underneath all the time, then you open up things for everybody else. but at the same time, you take their best player out of the game. So for me, the number one thing in this game is stop the run and make them be one-dimensional. I don't care if they throw it to them all day long. If you get them in 3rd and 8s and things like that, you're still probably going to stop them more times than not. So for me, this game, it's all about stopping the run. That is the strength of the Stanford offense is their running game. So if you stop that, then I don't think they're going to be able to score very many points, even with a great receiver.
I mean, what's the most damage he could do in a game? I mean, is he going to go for 298 and 4 touchdowns? Okay, maybe he's done that already. Maybe that is the extreme of that. And that was against Colorado. Like, I'm sure he went with Travis Hunter was in that game, wasn't he?
Yeah, I would guess.
Or was that, remember Travis was hurt for a little bit after he got knocked out by Colorado State?
I think he played
State.
in that game.
Did he play
because
that
I believe there was some trash talk that took place before and after that game. So, I mean, he's done it against an elite cover guy before. This is a legit receiver. They have to be able to get him the ball, though.
Yeah, and so many people have asked, too, like, why doesn't he transfer away from Stanford? But Bill and I on the ride down the 14-hour drive all the way to Miami last week, we were talking to Anish Shroff, who, interestingly enough, did the Syracuse-Stanford game a couple of weeks ago for ESPN, then did the Tech-Miami game. So familiar with both, and I was just a fly on the wall as him and Bill are just exchanging nuggets and tidbits of information and whatnot. And he had mentioned how big family guy, families very into the education side of things. His parents, were big into academics and whatnot, and he truly values the Stanford degree, which is why he's stuck around in Palo Alto. Despite if he goes somewhere else, he probably catches the ball a lot more and helps his draft stock and everything else.
Well, I mean, Stanford puts guys in the NFL anyway,
right?
And then post playing career, if you don't make it, you got a Stanford degree. That's pretty good.
Yeah,
I don't think I'd be turning that down. I think that's why you don't see a ton of guys transfer away from Stanford. Typically, I mean, maybe every now and then, but once you're in there, I think you're like, this is a pretty good backup plan if I got a Stanford degree with this.
Sure. What you got, Will?
So I got a question for the group. You guys are pretty sharp, so you probably know this. Without looking, how tall is Aya Minor?
6'2".
6'2", but he's kind of.
When I watch him, he looks like he's 6'5". I was surprised when I made up the roster card and he was quote unquote only 6'2".
He might be one of those guys that has longer arms, like a basketball player who might be 6'6", but he plays like he's 6'9".
Is his height listed in meters? Because that's completely different from Canadian to U.S.
But he's also big bodied. Like, I want to say he's like 210 or something like that. Is he 210? Yeah. So he's physical, very physical receiver.
Looks and plays bigger than he even is. He's a big guy.
He's in the video game, as Andy and I would know. He would be down as a possession receiver. In the video game, rather than, I think, what are the other options? Deep threat, speed.
Yeah, I forget all of them.
13 for 284. Is that what it was? That's a lot of yards per catch.
Yeah.
No
So they're just not tackling?
It doesn't look like Colorado didn't do much tackling of anybody last year.
That's definitely true.
Sure. All right. Well, anything else on this run offense? Because again, that is their strength. Before we kind of move on to the defensive side of the football for Stanford, Chris.
I don't think so. Again, I'll be interested to see what they do at quarterback. You could try. I don't think I wouldn't have much confidence in Lamson if I was Stanford. You could try Elijah Brown, and if it didn't seem like he was ready, you could still redshirt him and then go back to Lamson next week or something like that. So it wouldn't surprise me if they pulled something like that out of their hat. It's just you don't really have much to go on when it comes to Brown right now, other than the fact that he was a 4-star recruit, and that doesn't necessarily tell us anything because he's a true freshman, and we don't know how much of the offense he's been able to pick up, especially since he's not getting number 2 quarterback reps. He's just been their number 3 guy for most of the year. But again, for me, stop the run. If you stop their running game, Tech will win, assuming the offense doesn't screw it up.
As always, Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. As our presenting sponsor, First Bank and Trust Company's support has been invaluable to TSL, helping us to bring you all the great content across all of your platforms. They offer a variety of checking and savings account options that are sure to meet your banking needs, and that includes free checking. So visit firstbank.com to find the account that's right for you. It's time for Stats Time with Scott Glesner. Let's toss it over to Will.
So Scott's got some good ones this week. First of all, the disclaimer that I have vetted and double-checked none of these. I trust Scott. Since 2012, Virginia Tech is 10-3 in games after facing a top 10 opponent. The Hokies are 9-2 when coming off a loss to a top 10 opponent. In 2021, they beat number 10 UNC, beat Middle Tennessee State the next week. In 2014, they beat number 8 Ohio State, lost to East Carolina the next game. So good
It's like
record.
21-0 in the first quarter. They just jumped on them.
All right, so now here's a stat that I find pretty fascinating. In Big East and ACC play, meaning dating back to 1993 when Big East round-robin play started, Virginia Tech has only started 0-2 once in conference play in all that time. 2019, which I don't recall. Details are lost on me.
Duke and Boston College. BC to start the season.
BC on the road and
then
Duke at
Duke
home.
the 45-10. Yeah.
Now, so this is only the 7th time that Virginia Tech has lost their first conference game. The first 6 times they went 5-1 in the next game. So that's pretty incredible over the course of 30 years to only be 0-2 on conference once. Now, here's a not good stat. This will be the 40th straight game where Virginia Tech will be playing as an unranked team. 40th straight game. That is the longest streak since the 397 game streak from 1956 to 1993. So in other words, since Virginia Tech got good in 1993, this is the longest streak they've had.
So when's the last time they were ranked after they beat UNC?
Yep. It was
in
on the
2021.
road at West Virginia. They were 24, my second week of college. Then they lost and haven't been ranked since.
Right.
So you're to blame.
It's all my fault. I brought the terrible terrible viewing of football from Syracuse, and I just dragged it down here with me, I guess.
So here's let's switch back to a good one. Virginia Tech is only averaging 38.2 penalty yards per game. That currently is the lowest average since 2008, when it was 34.6 penalty yards per game.
That includes fighting some phantom holds on PJ Prelu's house call.
That is correct. Given that penalties have been a huge problem earlier in the Pry era, the very first game at ODU, I think they had a bunch of penalties. And then, of course, there were the
NC State game.
10 false starts against NC State, including...
Was it 10?
It was
Yeah,
10.
I think they hit double digits.
Oh, my gosh.
I've double-checked that number. So they're doing well in that area so far this year. Now, if Bayshore Tootin hits 100 rushing yards Saturday, it would tie him for the second all-time longest streak with 100-yard rushing games. That would tie him with Ryan Williams and Kenny Lewis, who both had 5 straight 100-yard rushing games. David Wilson has marked 7 straight 100-yard rushing games. And that concludes Stat Time with Scott Glesner.
Well done, Will. Appreciate it as always. Thank you to Scott Glesner
Solid material.
for the interesting material there. Let's talk about this Cardinal defense, and it is, for those that don't know, singular. It's one Cardinal.
That's right.
It is not the Cardinals, the Stanford Cardinal.
It's
of
the
course.
color.
Oh, that's what it is.
The mascot is the color. I mean, the
Okay.
team name is
team
the
name
color.
is
They used to
Like
be
the
Cardinals
orange.
plural, though, right?
I think they used to be like the Indians back in the day.
I am going to
So
look
what's
that
with
up.
the tree? Where do you get a tree from?
I
that?
forget exactly. I've looked it up before, but I forget exactly why the tree becomes the logo there.
You should
But
Google image this.
they've got that goofy looking tree.
There's a lot of interesting pictures of that thing.
I'm sure.
They've got that goofy looking tree for the mascot, which is pretty awesome. And actually, looking forward to the Stanford band out there. That's always a
Yeah.
pretty like a disruptive unit, I should say. They,
Yeah,
they
it
always
is,
like to
doesn't
be like making fun of stuff, so it'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, no doubt. Everybody's favorite matchup in the old, when you could play mascot matchup, was always the orange versus the tree.
Critical piece of info here. On November 17th, 1981, school president Donald Kennedy declared that the athletic teams be represented by the color cardinal in its singular form. So up until then, they were the Cardinals. So John Elway, for example, played for the Cardinals. I'll double check that, but that's the way I interpret that.
And I was correct. They were the Indians from 1930 to 72.
Oh.
And that's when they changed it initially. So they were on the forefront of changing away from
Yeah.
offensive mascot
They were
names.
woke before it was cool to be woke.
Yeah, 72 to 81, they were the Cardinals, plural.
There we go. Let's talk about this defense a little bit. It kind of mirrors the offense in a way, because they're impressive stopping the run, some big boys up front, old school style defense when you take a look at the roster like you guys were breaking down before we got on the air, but it gets pretty dreadful when you start airing it out. That being said, they've played some explosive passing offenses.
They
as
certainly
well.
have. If you just take their defense how it's listed, they run a 5-2. They list 2 edge players, 3 defensive tackles, and then 2 regular linebackers. Now, I'm sure like most teams these days, they're a little bit versatile in their alignments. They probably take out one of those linemen sometimes, bring in a nickel, and then they're maybe more of a traditional look. But like most teams, they can mix up their fronts and things like that. They don't get into the backfield a ton, but they're just solid. You don't gain very much yards on them. Syracuse has a really good running back. And how many yards did they hold Syracuse to that night? Like 20-some rushing yards.
26. I think
26 rushing yards. I don't think either offensive line was good that night, Syracuse or Stanford's. But Stanford's front does seem to be legit. And again, that's an interesting matchup going up against the Virginia Tech running game, which obviously is a huge strength for the Hokies. It's strength on strength. It's also weakness on weakness because the Stanford pass defense has been pretty bad. Virginia Tech has failed to reach 200 passing yards in any of their last 4 games, which didn't happen to them at all last year. The Tech passing game has taken a step back. Can they get it going against one of the worst pass defenses of the country? And vice versa, if you're a Stanford fan, you're probably like, well, we finally got a chance to stop the pass this week because we're playing Virginia Tech. So this is an interesting matchup from that standpoint because it's strength on strength and weakness on weakness.
Taking a look at some of the numbers, Stanford's 16th in FBS in rushing defense. Yards per carry ranks 33rd in the country, but then you go to passing, 125th out of, I believe, 134 is the total in FBS. 99th in yards per average when throwing the football. So opposing quarterbacks, their quarterback rating, 99th. They're struggling to stop the throwing, but again, they're pretty good up front against the run. Virginia Tech can run the football. You got to feel like he's got to touch the ball, if he can, health-wise, 20 times this week.
And I think the extra day probably helps him a little bit. He's looking healthier and healthier each week, really. And you get an extra day of recovery between the Miami game and this game, then, you've got to ride the hot hand. You got to continue to ride Kyron Drones in the running game. And I know you're running into Stanford's strength defensively for a certain extent, but offensively, you have to lean on your own strength. And I do think if Virginia Tech can be somewhat successful running the ball, it opens up the passing game some. At least it should, in theory, against a bad secondary.
It feels like this is one of those games where they have to really get back to that misdirection stuff and get them going, looking in the wrong spot and eyes in the wrong spot, and all of a sudden Drones is going this way with the ball instead of the running back. Because I don't know if you just line up and just physically overwhelm Stanford. I think they're a pretty veteran group in the front. They're obviously keyed in on stopping the run. That's what they've done for most of the season. But if you're Tech, you have to run the ball. That is where your offense is successful. And then, like you've mentioned, it's not like they're going out there and throwing for 400 yards. That's not how they're going to beat teams. They're going to beat teams like they did last year by getting the run going, throwing off of that, and ideally, running for 200 yards. I don't think they'll get to that number in this game. I think if they do, you feel pretty good about Tech's chances of winning this game, but they have to run the ball because that's just kind of what this identity of this offense is.
Feels almost in a way as if something has to give, right? Because Stanford is 100th on the dot in the country in allowing 32.7 points per game scoring defense-wise. Virginia Tech ranks 62nd in scoring offense. They're scoring 30.4 points per game. Remember the days when we were talking about, hey, can they finally score 30 points? Well, we're there, guys.
Yep.
Because we're averaging it now.
Exactly right.
But it almost feels like something's got to give, something's got to crack when those two collide.
If Virginia Tech can score 30 in this game, I would feel like they were a shoo-in to win the football game because I think it would be tough for Stanford to do that with a backup quarterback or even with their starting quarterback. They didn't score 30 against TCU and lost. They didn't score 30 against Syracuse and won. Obviously, they didn't score 30 against Clemson. So they're a team that's not getting to 30 points. So if Virginia Tech can manage to get there, or if Tech can even manage to get like in the upper 20s, I think they have a very good chance to win.
If it comes down to a field goal, I think both teams are feeling pretty good. Kicker for Stanford, Emmett Kenny. He's 8 for 8 on the year. His long is 45 yards. And then we saw what John Love did last week, a 52-yarder, a 57-yarder. I think Hokies are feeling pretty high on number 17 as long as there's only one on the field.
But you'd have to think that John Love is a pretty good candidate to get number 25 this week. And if he's number
Probably.
25, then there's no double number
mistakes.
problem. Cole Nelson, go out there and block if you want, if that's the case, because there's not going to be a double number issue.
Well, you're just waiting on the ultimate mistake. Accidentally have two number 25s.
two number 25s. For the first time ever, we're awarding two 25s on this, and then they're both out there. That would be fitting, I think.
That would be pretty darn near incredible. How about the return game for Stanford? Nothing necessarily jumps off the page. Almost feels like Tech's a little due. Tootin is yet to break one. He's not taking kicks at this point. Hasn't really all year, just because they're trying to keep him as healthy as possible and then save him for the run game. But you saw Prelu's, explosive abilities on that run. He's back there taking kicks with Malachi Thomas, and Jalen Lane hasn't cracked a big one necessarily since Marshall. Maybe the Hokies are due for one.
Yeah, maybe. Stanford's been pretty good with their coverage teams. Tiger Bachmeier's been good at returns for them, but at the same time, all of his big returns were against Cal Poly, and hasn't really gotten much of a chance against the other teams. So, on paper, Virginia Tech, I believe, has a special teams advantage.
Would you advise them to squib kick it to him at all?
I don't.
Or just say kick it deep for a touchback.
Probably just go ahead and kick it out of the end zone if it were me.
I think that would be the appropriate approach, no doubt about it. Tech with an opportunity to even things up in ACC play at 1-1, also get back to 500, and then you're trying to kind of take off from here and build off of the momentum you created against Miami, playing your best football game of the year against a top 10 team. Unfortunately, didn't come away with the win. How do you do that? How do you turn that page? Where can Virginia Tech exploit Stanford specifically?
I mean, I think this game is as much as anything about Virginia Tech's mentality and their mental state after last week. You want them to play pissed off. You want to use last week's situation, as a positive and go out there in a really bad mood. But you also have to play in control, because there's plenty of teams through the years have gone out and played out pissed off, and they've been out of control and undisciplined, and they've lost because of it. So you've got to take that anger, but also be able to control it in game and play a clean game. And I think all things considered, I think Virginia Tech is better than Stanford. I really absolutely believe that they are, but you just never know. Like we say it all the time. It seems like there's something new every week. There's a different issue that pops up every week. So you just, as a Tech fan, you sit back and you wonder, what's it going to be this week? But I feel like if Virginia Tech's mentality is strong and they coach a clean game, then they'll win.
Yeah, that's a long way to go. When you're on the plane and you're on there, if your mentality is not right, that's a lot of travel for your mentality not to be right. It can kind of build up over time. So that's why I feel like, this week the focus has to be there. You have to be focused getting on that plane to go out there. Because if you're going to sit there and think about it for an extra day too, because they're going out there on Thursday, I just don't think that's a good mindset to be in going into this game. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think this is about Virginia Tech and how they react to last week. And if they play like they should be all right. But this is a team that's shown they sort of play to the level of their competition. When the team has not been as great, they've sort of been down there in that range. When the team's pretty good, like Miami, they show that they can stick with that team too. I think this would be a very good week if you're a Hokies fan to break out of that spell and show that you're a better team than one that you're more than a 7-point favorite against.
Before we get into predictions, how much does the travel play into this? Some people are under the belief that, it can play a huge impact in the game. You got to go all the way out west. You were just down in Miami, blah, 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 blah. You go out a day early. You also get an extra day because you played on Friday instead of Saturday. Brent Pry seems like, okay, we're going to do some things different. They've scheduled the sleep specifically, the time on the plane. He talked about that. But Friday is just their normal on-the-road Friday. They want to make it as normal of a simulation as possible to get ready for the game Saturday. And at the end of the day, you're lacing them up to play a football game.
Yeah, good decision to go out a day early, I think. Let's use Stanford as an example. They've taken 2 trips to the East Coast so far on 2 straight weeks. They beat Syracuse in their first one, which wasn't easy. And then in their second one, they were supposed to fly out on Thursday to Clemson.
That's right.
But their plane got stuck on, not the runway, but basically they sat on the plane for like an hour. I think they had to deplane, and then the flight got canceled. And then they had to do the same thing all over the next day. So they had to delay their travel plans by a day to Clemson. Despite that, they were still in the game in the early fourth quarter. And if it wasn't for turnovers, would have been right there with Clemson. So the jet lag, as people like to call it, it doesn't seem to have affected Stanford on their 2 straight trips. So I don't think it can be used as an excuse if Virginia Tech loses. I don't feel that way. It's a big game though, isn't it? I mean, you're talking about the difference between being 2-4 and 3-3, and I don't think you want to walk into the second half of the season, needing to go 4-2.
Yeah,
with Clemson sitting
with
there.
Clemson, one of those.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
What do you think, Andy? Same mindset?
Yeah, I did. Just travel is just a bear sometimes, and sometimes you think like, oh, people make flights all the time. It's like some of these guys have never traveled this far in their life. I think for a lot of them, maybe getting on the plane last week, going to Miami might have been the first time they do that, getting on a plane. You don't think about that sometimes when you're doing it, but I think most of them, at least the guys we asked at the press conference, like, have you ever been to California? Like, no, I've never traveled that far. It's like, okay, you've never flown that far either. So it's something to consider. I thought it was interesting. They said they were get like an extra large plane that had like more leg room or something like that for the
Specifically for the captains,
O-line,
though.
D-line, and the captains. It's like, yeah, I think if I'm, Brody Meadows and I'm 6'7", I'm like, I'm going to take that extra. Xavier Turner Bradshaw, my high school teammate, like, you can have the smaller seat. I'm going to need the larger seat with the leg room on this one. So it'd be interesting how they like divvy that up.
Did you ever see pictures of Andre the Giant sitting on a plane?
Well, yeah, I had like two seats next to him.
It was pretty. The guy next to him is always like way over here, just squished in the corner.
Yeah, that'd be pretty brutal.
Yeah, no doubt. Let's predict this thing, shall we? We'll start with Will in the fourth chair.
So, I'm worried about Stanford's. Let's pretend Ashton Daniels is going to play. That's how I make my decisions. I don't know anything about the backup that might play. If you watch video of them, they have a more RPO option-based rush attack, I think. I'm not an analyst. I thought that was one of the things about the Miami game last weekend is that Miami had more of what I would call a conventional running attack. And I thought that allowed Tech to blitz some more, kind of play more freely on defense. And I thought they played more downhill than I've seen them in a while. So I worry about that with regards to Stanford's offense, and they defend the run very well on defense. Ultimately, I picked Virginia Tech to win 31-21, and there's a couple reasons for that. Number one, I just don't want to ponder the prospect of coming back 2-4. But I also, as I wrote in the preview, I can't predict with a straight face at this point that Virginia Tech's going to win a one-score game. So I got to predict them to win by 2 scores, so I'm picking 31-21, and I don't feel great about it. I do feel better after hearing the Scott Glesner stat that they've only started out 0-2 in conference once in 31 years. That's historical stuff. It doesn't have anything to do with the matchups here, but that's kind of my take. I've got 31-21, and I am responsible for David since he's not here. He picks Tech to ring it up. He's got Tech winning 38-24.
Interesting. What you got, Andy?
I said Tech 27-20, which I realize is a one-score game, and that goes against the historical precedent here with this coaching staff. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they go on like a game-winning drive to win it at the end. Maybe Stanford pulls within 27-20 in that one. Like I said before, I feel like they sort of played to the level of competition. So I don't know if they're going to just be head and shoulders above any power conference team like this in a game that they're playing. And until they prove otherwise, I'm going to say it's going to be within a one-score game like that.
I had the same score as Andy, and then I remembered, oh crap, that's a one-score game, so I have to change it. So I took a field goal away from Stanford.
They're 1-10 in one-score games. They have won game in there.
Yeah, but I've told myself I'm not going to pick them in a one-score game until they show me they do it again.
Sure.
So I've got it 27-17. I think Tech has advantages in this game. There's some matchup issues, of course, as always. The wide receiver worries me. Their defensive front worries me. But ultimately, especially if Stanford starts a backup quarterback, I just think Virginia Tech's going to have a little bit more, and we'll figure out a way to win the game.
Nick Brown, our mustache man behind the scenes producing the show, he picks Virginia Tech to win it 38-17. So both him and David are high on the scoring. I picked Virginia Tech right at their average. They're averaging just under 31 points a game. I got Virginia Tech winning at 31-17 on Saturday.
So I'm the only one that has the cover for Stanford on this.
Ooh.
That's correct.
As of now,
right.
we'll see.
And you're the only one that has it at one. Well, you're the only one. Well, I guess 8.5. Anything above a touchdown, 8 points would be more than a one-score game. But so I guess it depends on how you see the line.
So Gio, the fan vote so far, we're only 415 votes into it. Typically, these polls will come out 12 to 1,500 people voting in them. 47% of Hokie fans say Tech will win by 1-10. Another 32% say the Hokies will win by 11 plus. So that's 79% that are picking Virginia Tech to win. And of course, the other 21% are picking Stanford to win.
Gotcha. Anything else? What's coming up on TSL this week as Andy and or is David going with you? You guys take off tomorrow?
And Ivan. We're all going out.
Ivan. There we go.
I bought tickets to Alcatraz on Friday.
Nice.
We're going to go tour Alcatraz, like a 3-hour
that's pretty cool.
tour that goes out there. So that should be fun. And Ivan's like, can we also take some pictures of the Golden Gate Bridge? I'm like, yeah, like we'll find time to do this stuff. And so I'm looking forward to the pictures that Ivan takes of the bridge. I mean, imagine that, like what he shoots here at football games, give him that picturesque scenery out there. That should be pretty fun. But I do have a mailbag going Thursday. I got to write that here tonight or tomorrow sometime in the airport.
Awesome.
I'm not doing an Inside the Numbers this week. I'm going to do a basketball column instead since Media Day was on Monday.
Nice.
That'll be tomorrow also.
Crazy. We're already doing crossover season.
I know.
Like that.
It's been a quick week.
So we're getting ready to record Buy or Sell. It's Wednesday, so we do the podcast. We're going to record the Buy or Sell video version right after this. It will run tomorrow. We're going to post the website version where fans can choose their buy or sell options Wednesday afternoon today. So look for that and vote today. We'll run our video tomorrow and we'll see how all that ends up.
Awesome. I think that wraps up episode 380 of the Tech Sideline podcast. If you're traveling out there, safe travels. It's quite the distance. And if you're just watching at home, hanging out, I bet you can find Chris at Champs. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I don't know. Haven't made up my mind
yet. He hasn't made up his mind yet. Regardless, it's the 3:30 kick here in Blacksburg between Virginia Tech and Stanford. For Nick Brown, for Will Stewart, for Andy Bitter, for Chris Coleman, I'm Giovanni Heater. So long, and we'll see you next week.